Chapter 11. March 1862. Freedom comes hard to Rezin, Davis, Shepherd, and almost too late. But freedom offered by Hugh Pendleton at Westwood to as many enslaved persons brings the best day ever. The harsh winter of 1861 and 1862 slowly yielded to spring and new growth, new signs of life reawakening, and a barely recognizable man coming across the yard to Fountain Rock. One chilly day in March, the family at Fountain Rock saw a strange man slowly making his way through the grove from the ridge road. He appeared old and ill, and no one knew that it was Davis until he reached the porch. Knowing that his life was nearly gone, he had sworn to give no further aid or assistance to the cause he had loved, and had come home. He had walked all the way from Harper's Ferry. Always a lover of the fields and woods and mountains, and especially a lover of the river, near which he had lived all his life. Davis Shepherd had come home spent and heartbroken to die. Freedom is offered by Hugh Pendleton at Westwood to as many enslaved persons, and George Slow also finds a friend for a lifetime. In late February 1862, Federal General Nathaniel Banks crossed into Virginia at Harper's Ferry, ventured through Charlestown, and continued deeply into the Shenandoah Valley into what would be for his troops a disastrous encounter with the Confederate General Stonewall Jackson's very fleet and hard-fighting brigade. Those enslaved persons in Jefferson County and beyond seized the opportunity to depart from the farms they worked and stubbornly affix themselves and their families to this massive federal army while it was here and available. Many found finding work and shelter at Harper's Ferry. Their number probably would soon exceed 2,000. Based on newspaper reports of the number of African Americans at Harper's Ferry in September of 1862. The exodus began in March. Shortly after Banks' army appeared in the county, his chief of staff, David Hunter Strother, again, whose wife lived in Charlestown and who had memorably encountered his friends in the Virginia militia in April 1861, as war was starting, kept a diary that charted the number of African Americans arriving in the spring of 1862 at federal encampments. He remarked in his diary on March 8th, "An excitement was produced in town by the arrival of a wagon load of Negro women and children with bag and baggage as if they were bound for a free country. I understand they were forwarded to Harper's Ferry. Numbers of men have flocked into town more or less every day since our occupation of about 10 days. The enslaved were leaving their farms all over the county. At Adam Stephen Dandridge's farm, the Bower, Dandridge recorded leaving that spring of 1862 a woman and her 2 children, 2 men and 1 boy, some men, 38-year-old John Pinko and 19-year-old William. James and Ann Huff wrote in their daily farm diary on March 12, 1862, "When we got up, we found every woman and child gone. Took our wagon and moved everything. Several of the neighbors' servants gone at the same time." Enslaved African Americans leave Mount Pleasant farm of Charles Agleby and his family. He wrote in his farm diary, March 10th, Monday, Negroes go into the Union lines, left the premises last night the following slaves: Martha, 17 years old, sound, healthy, stout, color rather light. Laura, black, 39 years old, medium size, handy at all works. Lewis, 23 years old, not very tall, but thick-set complexion, copperish. Bob, 17 years old, a mulatto, chunky, but not tall or large for his age. Henry Robinson, dark complexion, slender male, age supposed to be 30 or upwards. He is the property of Mrs. Elizabeth Strider and had Laura for his wife. March 13, Wednesday. More workers leave by night. Left last night, Ralph Madison Hall, age 26, dark, good-looking, heavy-set, medium height, boot and shoemaker. Silas Hall, ditto, from Mr. Conklin, about same time, age 14. Some returned to their farms and owners in May when it briefly appeared that Stonewall Jackson might capture Harper's Ferry. Hoping for mercy, some of these returnees were promptly and angrily resold by their owner. Hugh Nelson Pendleton, who built in the early 1850s his farm and abode called Westwood, just west of Ripon and near the border with Clark County, had written of his animus against enslavement. As of the summer of 1860, he had 10 men and 6 women at Westwood, including a 7-month-old baby girl. According to his daughter-in-law, Tippy Butler, he had once written, "All my slaves are kindly treated and seem contented and happy, but I have no doubt that they would gladly be free. All have been more or less instructed, and some read very well," despite, Tippy Butler added, the fact that it was considered illegal to teach literacy to those enslaved in Virginia. Pendleton wrote acknowledging the Thorntons, a family of enslaved workers who worked a nearby farm, and sometimes Pendleton, as well as the Butlers, had opted to find better opportunities in Liberia, and 10 of that family had already left for Cape Palmas in 1855. But now, with the Federal Army literally in his own backyard that spring in 1862, Pendleton, the family history goes and is supported, decided to offer freedom to those he enslaved. The first man to opt for freedom at Westwood was 32-year-old George Slough, who was born there in 1830 when it was part of another farm property. Two other men, one 31 and the other 35 years old in 1862, also joined the Army with George. The oldest woman, who was 63, chose to stay. Captain Frank A. Donelson, later of the 118th Pennsylvania Corn Exchange Regiment, described his first meeting Slough while his army was moving towards Berryville from Charlestown in early March 1862. Donelson, who befriended George Slough for a lifetime, wrote how their encounter happened. Donelson wrote his brother March 15th from Bolivar, describing the beauty and devastation of Harper's Ferry, the homes in Charlestown, and then his journey towards Berryville when he meets George Slough. Dear brother, here I am once again at old Virginia's sacred soil. In the few lines written from Harper's Ferry, I said I did not think much of the place. That was literally true regards the town, but as to the beauty of the country, the magnificence of the surrounding landscapes, there can be no question. Harper's Ferry is situated at the junction of the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers and is probably one of the most picturesque located places in America. I can conceive of no more beautiful scene than just here. Then, too, it is full of memories of the stirring past, although desolation and ruin reign everywhere. There is scarcely anything besides a few standing walls to remind one of the busy arsenal where so many muskets, now in the hands of the enemy, as well as its own troops, were made by the government. The engine house where John Brown battled for abolition's cause is still standing, but the citizens of the town itself have deserted it. The only place of business open are our own people, and the only customer, too, are our own army. Everything wears an aspect of utter decay and destruction. I left on Thursday morning and rode as far as Charlestown, a distance of 9 miles in the sutler's wagon. When, finding he was not going further, I took up my journey on foot for Berryville, a distance of a trifle less than 13 miles. Charlestown is a pretty place, with numberless frame cottages painted white with green Venetian shutters. I did not have time to go all over the place, but a number of historical places were pointed out to me, notably the courthouse where John Brown was tried, and the jail where he was kept prisoner. Nothing of note happened on the journey excepting the meeting with a mounted officer who had kept me company until near Berryville. He said he was a major of a Rhode Island regiment and asked so many questions about myself and the probable number of troops at Harper's Ferry that I became suspicious and, in fact, alarmed, and told him a pretty lively tale about the latter place. While conversing with him, I could not understand why, if he was journeying from Harper's Ferry, he knew so little about the situation there. However, I feared to ask him the question lest my suspicions prove correct. I might again be taken prisoner. He was a very gentlemanly man and dressed in our uniform, that is, so much of it as I could see. He had a glazed forage cap and a long, dark blue, almost black circular or officer's cavalry overcoat, and was armed with holster pistols and one also attached to his waist belt, but carried no sword. He was about 40 years of age and wore his beard cut close all around his face. Just before reaching Berryville, He stopped at a private roadside house where a female, evidently a lady, came out, and while pumping water for him, conversed in a tone of voice most inaudible to me, at least. I stood aside while they talked together and was satisfied that they knew each other quite well. Here he left me after cordially shaking my hand. He said that he enjoyed my company very much, which had helped him to pass way many tedious hours of lonely traveling. All along the good solid turnpike to Berryville, there were evidences of the passing of large bodies of troops, there being scarcely a fence rail left in the whole distance, and the sad havoc made with the woods where an encampment had taken place and was most marked. I saw no soldiers during this tramp. The farmers appeared to have been at work, and the country, as far back as I could see, was well cultivated, and a full field of fine-looking wheat, at least to my unpracticed eye. It looked remarkably good and heavy. They meet George Slow. As we moved away from the vicinity of Charlestown, we saw a number of Negroes leaning on a fence surrounding a neat little house on what appeared to be a large plantation. Captain Urey spoke to one of them and asked whether he would like to join the army. Replying that he would, the captain told him to come along, and he and 2 or 3 others did so. In conversation with him, I learned his name to be George Slow, and that he was or had been a slave, but his master, Hugh Pendleton, knowing that he could not keep his slaves, had given him his freedom, and he, George, would like me to go back and corroborate what he had said. He had been a house servant and nicely brought up. We like him very much, and he is a first-rate cook and very handy generally. Slow continued with the army, acting first as a servant to Captain Urey, but when Urey took sick, Slow in May 1862 transferred to the service of Donelson, with whom he stayed through many battles. On May 30th, as Donelson later wrote, he was severely wounded at the Battle of Fair Oaks outside of Richmond, and George Slow relentlessly stayed by his side or brought help, saving Donelson's life.